The great hall of the Galactic Assembly buzzed with worried voices. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their assigned seats, their different shapes and colors creating a rainbow of alien life. But today, fear filled the air like a bad smell. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zilani stood at the center podium, his tall, thin body shaking slightly. His skin looked like blue crystal, and when the light hit it just right, it sparkled. But there was no beauty in his appearance today. His large dark eyes showed only desperation. Honored members of the assembly, Kethvar began, his voice carrying through the translation devices that let everyone understand each other. I come before you with the dying breath of my people. The Krex Empire has taken 17 of our worlds. They kill everyone. They destroy everything. Soon there will be no Zilani left in the galaxy. The hall grew quiet. Everyone knew about the Krex. They were the nightmare that kept peaceful species awake at night. Big, strong, and cruel, they had been conquering worlds for 300 years. They never stopped. They never showed mercy. We have tried everything, Kethvar continued. We offered them tribute. They took it and killed our messengers. We tried to negotiate. They used our diplomats for target practice. We fought them in space battles. Our fleets are gone. Our colonies are ash. We have maybe 6 months before they reach our homeworld. In the audience, Captain Jake Morrison sat with the human delegation. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair and scars on his hands from old battles. His uniform was simple compared to the fancy clothes worn by other species. Humans were new to this galactic community, having joined only 5 years ago. Morrison watched as the older, more established species gave their responses. The Altanian Republic's representative stood first. He was tall and elegant with skin that changed colors like a mood ring. The Altanian Republic feels deep sympathy for the Zilani people, the representative said in a smooth voice. However, our forces are currently engaged in protecting our own trade routes. We cannot spare any ships. The Vorthon Collective representative came next. She looked like a cross between a spider and a butterfly, with 6 arms and wings that glowed softly. The collective would love to help, but our military doctrine does not allow for offensive operations outside our territory. One by one, the major powers gave their excuses. Too busy, too far away. Not their problem. Morrison felt sick listening to them. These were the species that claimed to represent civilization in the galaxy. But when real evil showed up, they hid behind paperwork and politics. The Meridian Union representative, a floating blob of energy contained in a crystal shell, spoke last among the major powers. Perhaps the Zilani could relocate to refugee camps in neutral space until this crisis passes. Relocate? Kethavar's voice cracked. You want us to abandon our worlds, our history, our dead? You want us to live in camps while the Krex turn our home into another dead rock? The energy being flickered. It is better than extinction. No, Kethvar said quietly. It is not. Morrison leaned forward in his seat. Next to him, Commander Lisa Hayes, a woman in her 30s with short brown hair, whispered, Are we really going to sit here and watch this? Wait, Morrison whispered back. Kethvar looked around the hall, his crystal skin now dull with defeat. I understand that the great powers have their own concerns. But I must ask, is there anyone? Anyone at all who will help us fight? The hall was silent. Species looked at their hands, their claws, their tentacles, anything but at the desperate Zilani ambassador. Then Morrison stood up. Captain Morrison of the Terran Federation, he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. My species would like to speak with Ambassador Kethvar privately after this session. A ripple of surprise went through the assembly. The Altanian representative made a sound like laughing. With respect, Captain, humanity has been part of this assembly for less time than it takes most of us to complete our education cycles. You have what, 50 ships? The Krex have thousands. 63 ships, Morrison corrected. But numbers aren't everything. Of course they are, the Vorthon representative said, her wings flickering with what looked like amusement. War is mathematics. The Krex are simply better at addition. Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. Ma'am, with respect, that's not how humans do math. After the session ended, Kethvar approached the human delegation area. Most of the other species had left quickly, probably not wanting to be associated with what they saw as a hopeless cause. Captain Morrison, Kethvar said, I am grateful for your interest, but I must be honest. We cannot pay you. We have little left to offer except the satisfaction of dying with honor. Morrison gestured to the chairs around a small table. Commander Hayes joined them, along with Lieutenant Colonel Ben Carter, a tough-looking man with dark skin and intelligent eyes. "Ambassador," Morrison said, "before we talk about dying, let's talk about living. Tell us about the Kreks. How do they fight?" Kethavar seemed confused by the question. "They fight with overwhelming force. Large fleets, heavy weapons, strong shields. They attack head-on and destroy everything in their path." "And how do you fight them?" Hayes asked. "The same way," Kethavar replied. "Fleet against fleet, honor against honor. It is the civilized way." Carter leaned forward. "How's that working out for you?" The Crystal Ambassador's shoulders sagged. "Not well." Morrison pulled out a small device and projected a holographic star map. "Show us your remaining territory." Kethavar pointed to several star systems connected by trade routes. Morrison studied the map for a moment, then looked at his colleagues. Hayes nodded slightly. Carter grinned. "Ambassador," Morrison said, "you said you heard whispers about our unconventional methods. What exactly did you hear?" "Stories," Kethavar said carefully. "About human conflicts. About how you fight wars that seem impossible to win. About tactics that other species find disturbing." "Disturbing is a good word," Carter said. "Are you disturbed by the idea of your species going extinct?" "Of course." "Then you're ready to learn," Morrison said. "But I need you to understand something first. We're not offering to fight your war for you. We're offering to teach you how to fight it like humans." Kethavar's large eyes blinked slowly. "What is the difference?" Hayes spoke up. "When humans fight, we don't fight for honor. We don't fight for glory. We fight to win. Period. We'll do whatever it takes, use whatever works, exploit every weakness. The goal isn't to have a good fight. The goal is for the other guy to stop fighting forever. Some species," Carter added, "find that approach morally questionable. And some species," Morrison finished, "are still alive because of it." Kethavar was quiet for a long time. Around them, the Great Hall continued to empty as representatives returned to their comfortable homes on their safe worlds. "What would you need from us?" Kethavar finally asked. "Total commitment," Morrison said. "Complete trust. And the understanding that when we're done teaching you, you won't be the same species you are now. War changes people. Human-style war changes them more." Kethavar looked at the star map, at the few remaining points of light that represented his people. "Will we survive?" Morrison met his gaze. "I can't promise you'll survive, but I can promise that if you don't survive, neither will they." The Zilani ambassador closed his eyes, then opened them with new determination. "When do we begin?" 3 months had passed since the first human advisors arrived on Vethtar, the Zilani homeworld. The planet looked peaceful from space, with blue oceans and white clouds, but Commander Lisa Hayes knew that looks could lie. Down on the surface, they were building something that would shake the galaxy. Hayes walked through the new war room that had been carved into the mountain outside the Zilani capital city. The walls were covered with displays showing star maps, ship movements, and tactical data. Zilani officers worked alongside human advisors, their crystal skin reflecting the glow of computer screens. "Report," Hayes said to Lieutenant Amy Foster, a young woman with red hair who specialized in guerrilla warfare training. "They're learning fast," Foster replied, pulling up a holographic display. "Maybe too fast. General Vexhal's people have absorbed everything we've taught them about hit-and-run tactics. Yesterday they presented a plan that would make our special forces proud." Hayes studied the plan on the screen. It was good, and very human in its thinking. "What about the psychological warfare division?" "That's where it gets interesting," Foster said, leading Hayes to another section of the war room. "Dr. Chris Parker has been working with their communication specialists." "Show her, Chris." Dr. Parker, a thin man with glasses who looked more like a professor than a military advisor, activated another display. "We've been analyzing Krek's communication intercepts for 3 months. Their language, their culture, their fears. The Zilani have been broadcasting surrender demands in Krek's battle language. Traditional stuff. Honorable defeat, terms of surrender, that kind of thing." "And?" Hayes prompted. Parker smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "I taught them some new words. Words that cut deeper than any laser weapon." On the screen, a translation of the latest Zilani broadcast appeared. Hayes read it and felt her blood go cold. The message wasn't about surrender or honor. It was about fear. About what happens to Krek's families when their warriors fail. About shame that would last for generations. About very specific and very personal threats. "Jesus, Chris," Hayes breathed. "That's dark even for us." The Krek started this war, Parker said simply. They chose to make it about extermination. We're just speaking their language. A chime sounded, indicating someone was entering the war room. Hayes turned to see Colonel Ben Carter walking toward them, followed by a group of new arrivals from Earth. She recognized Major Sam Rodriguez, a special operations veteran, and Sergeant Kelly Wright, who had a reputation for making things explode in creative ways. Second wave is here, Carter announced, and they brought toys. Rodriguez stepped forward, his calm voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real combat. Commander Hayes, we've brought the specialists you requested. Demolitions, infiltration, psychological operations, and some equipment that isn't in any official inventory. What kind of equipment? Hayes asked. Sergeant Wright grinned and patted a large case she was carrying. The kind that makes big Krek ships stop working permanently. As they were talking, General Vexhall approached the group. The Zalani military commander had changed over the past 3 months. His movements were sharper, his eyes colder. He no longer wore the ceremonial robes that marked his rank, instead choosing practical military gear that looked disturbingly human in design. Major Rodriguez, Vexhall said, his translated voice carrying no emotion. We have prepared the scenarios you requested. When do we begin live training exercises? Rodriguez exchanged a look with Hayes. The Zalani were eager, maybe too eager. General, before we move to live exercises, I need to understand something. Are your people ready to do whatever it takes to win? We are ready to die for our world, Vexhall replied. That's not what I asked, Rodriguez said quietly. Are you ready to make them die for theirs? Vexhall was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. Yes. The moment was interrupted by an alarm. All around the war room, displays flashed red as sensor data poured in from the outer system. Contact, reported a Zalani technician. Krek scouting fleet, 4 ships entering the outer system. Hayes felt her heart rate increase. This was it. The first real test of everything they had taught the Zalani. General, she said to Vexhall, your call. How do you want to handle this? 3 months ago, Vexhall would have ordered a direct fleet engagement. Zalani ships would have met the Kreks in open space, fought honorably and probably died. Today was different. Implement Plan 7, Vexhall ordered. Around the war room, Zalani officers began coordinating a response that would have horrified their ancestors. Instead of meeting the enemy fleet directly, they activated a network of hidden weapons platforms, stealth ships, and communication jammers that had been positioned throughout the system over the past month. Hayes watched on the tactical display as the trap unfolded. The Krek scouts entered what they thought was a lightly defended system. Instead, they found themselves cut off from their own communications, surrounded by threats they couldn't see, and facing an enemy that refused to fight fair. The first Krek ship died when its engines simply stopped working. No explosion, no dramatic battle. One moment it was moving, the next it was dead in space. Sergeant Wright's toys were performing exactly as advertised. The second ship tried to run, but found its navigation systems had been compromised by a computer virus that shouldn't have been able to affect Krek's technology. It began flying in circles, its crew probably panicking. The third ship attempted to fight, firing its weapons at targets that weren't there while real threats positioned themselves behind it. The fourth ship, the command vessel, managed to get off a distress signal before a carefully placed explosive device turned its communication array into scrap metal. Efficient, Major Rodriguez commented, watching the display. Clean, effective. Within 2 hours, all 4 Krek ships were either destroyed or captured. The Zalani had suffered 0 casualties, but Hayes noticed something that worried her. As the Zalani crews reported their success, she heard excitement in their voices. They had tasted victory for the first time in months, and they liked it. General Vexhall, she said carefully, what are your orders regarding prisoners? Vexhall looked at her with those cold eyes. What do you recommend, Commander? Hayes felt a chill. 3 months ago, he would have automatically said they would treat prisoners with honor. Now he was asking humans for advice on how to handle captured enemies. Intelligence value first, she said. Get what we need to know. After that, she paused, thinking about the larger war. After that, make sure word gets back to their fleet about what happened here. And how do we do that? Vexhall asked. Dr. Parker stepped forward. Leave some alive, he said simply. Scared and alive. Let them report back about weapons they couldn't understand, tactics they'd never seen, and an enemy that doesn't fight the way civilized species are supposed to fight. Vexhall nodded slowly. I understand. As the various teams began debriefing the engagement, Hayes pulled Carter aside. Ben, I'm worried we might be too successful here. Carter looked at her questioningly. Look at them, Hayes said, gesturing around the war room. 3 months ago, these people were pacifists who believed in honorable combat. Now they're setting traps, using psychological warfare, and asking us how to terrorize prisoners. That's what they needed to become to survive, Carter replied. But what happens when the war is over? Hayes asked. What happens to a species that's learned to think like humans about warfare? Carter was quiet for a moment. I guess we'll find out. On the main display, the last Krex ship was being escorted to a prison facility. The surviving crew would be questioned, processed, and eventually released to tell their story to the Krex High Command. The story they would tell would be about an enemy that fought without honor, used weapons that shouldn't exist, and showed no mercy to those who threatened their worlds. It would be a story about terror wrapped in tactical brilliance. It would be a story about humans and the species they had chosen to teach. Hayes wondered if they were saving the Zilani or creating something worse than the Krex. Time would tell. 6 months after the first human advisor set foot on Zilani soil, Major Sam Rodriguez crouched behind a broken wall on what used to be the Zilani colony world of Kethmore. The planet had once been home to 3 million Zilani civilians. Now it was a graveyard that the Krex had turned into a military base. Rodriguez checked his watch and activated his communication device. Around him, shapes moved in the darkness. Half were human special forces soldiers. Half were Zilani commandos who had learned to move like ghosts. All teams report status, Rodriguez whispered into his communicator. Team Alpha in position, came the voice of Sergeant Kelly Wright. Charges are set on the power grid. Team Beta ready, reported Lieutenant Amy Foster. Infiltration route is clear. Team Gamma standing by, said a voice that made Rodriguez proud. It was Commander Thekval, General Vexhall's daughter, who had volunteered for the most dangerous part of the mission. Rodriguez looked at the Zilani commando crouched next to him. 6 months ago, Keltar had been a civilian engineer. Now he carried weapons that would have given nightmares to Galactic Assembly peacekeepers, and his crystal skin had been treated with chemicals that made it nearly invisible in darkness. Remember, Rodriguez said quietly, this isn't about destroying the base. Any species with enough firepower can blow things up. This is about sending a message that the Krex will never forget. Keltar nodded. His people had learned that lesson well. Too well sometimes. The base spread out below them, built on the ruins of a Zilani city. Krex engineers had torn down homes and schools to make room for weapon storage and barracks. The bodies of the planet's former inhabitants had been left where they fell, as a warning to anyone who might think about resisting. Rodriguez had seen war zones before, but this level of deliberate cruelty still made his stomach turn. The Krex hadn't just conquered this world. They had destroyed it out of spite. Dr. Parker, Rodriguez said into his communicator, you're sure about the psychology profile? Dr. Chris Parker's voice came back from the command ship in orbit. The Krex officer in charge of this base is Commander Grakthor. 17 years of service, perfect record, never lost a battle. His entire sense of self-worth is built on being undefeatable. And his weakness? Pride, Parker replied. He believes the Zilani are weak, cowardly, and incapable of real resistance. He's about to learn otherwise. Rodriguez activated the mission timer. All teams execute in 3, 2, 1. The first part of the plan happened exactly as designed. Sergeant Wright's explosives cut power to the base's outer defenses. Foster's team disabled the communication arrays. Commander Thekval's group began their infiltration through the base's waste disposal system. But Rodriguez knew that the real weapon in this assault wasn't explosives or stealth. It was fear. As the lights went out across the Krex base, speakers that had been secretly installed over the past month began broadcasting. The sounds weren't random noise. They were carefully designed psychological weapons, created by Dr. Parker and refined by Zilani artists who understood how to make sound into terror. The broadcasts told stories in the Krex language about what happened to warriors who failed their people. They spoke of shame that lasted generations, of families cast out, of names forgotten. But worse than the words were the sounds underneath, screaming that could have been Krex voices, weapons fire that seemed to come from everywhere, and a low humming that made even humans feel uneasy. Rodriguez watched through his night vision scope as Krek's soldiers stumbled out of their barracks, confused and frightened. These were the same warriors who had laughed while destroying Zilani colonies. Now they were jumping at shadows. Phase 2, Rodriguez commanded. This was where the operation moved from standard military assault to something darker. Teams of Zilani commandos began picking off individual Krek soldiers, but not killing them. Instead, they used weapons that paralyzed, captured, or simply made their targets disappear. The psychological impact was devastating. Krek soldiers would see their friends vanish into darkness, hear their screams over the communication system, but never find bodies. Some of the missing would reappear hours later, alive but terrified, with stories about voices in the dark that spoke perfect Kreks and knew things about their families that no enemy should know. Rodriguez moved with Keltar toward the command center. They passed Krek soldiers who were shooting at nothing, calling for help that couldn't come, or simply sitting in corners with their weapons pointed at the darkness. "Major," Keltar whispered, "is this what human warfare is always like?" Rodriguez thought about the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when we're fighting someone who deserves it." They reached the command center to find it defended by Commander Grakthor and his elite guard. The Krek's commander was everything Dr. Parker had described: tall, heavily armored, and radiating the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. That confidence began to crack when he saw what was standing in his doorway. Rodriguez stepped into the light, followed by Keltar and 3 other Zilani commandos. To Grakthor, it must have looked impossible. The species he had been exterminating was here in his most secure facility, armed with weapons he didn't recognize. "Commander Grakthor," Rodriguez said in perfect Kreks, "my name is Major Sam Rodriguez of the human military. These are my Zilani allies. We're here to discuss the terms of your surrender." Grakthor's mandibles clicked with what Rodriguez recognized as nervous laughter. "Surrender? You are 5 warriors in a base of 5,000. You will die here, will we?" Rodriguez asked calmly. He activated his communicator. "Status report." The voices that came back painted a picture of total tactical superiority. Every critical system in the base had been captured or destroyed. Most of the Krek soldiers were either prisoners, casualties, or too frightened to fight effectively. 5,000 soldiers, Rodriguez said to Grakthor, and in 3 hours, we've made them irrelevant. Do you know why? Grakthor raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking. "Because," Rodriguez continued, "you've been fighting the wrong war. You thought this was about who has the biggest guns and the most ships. But war isn't about that. War is about breaking the enemy's will to fight. And Commander, your will is broken." To prove his point, Rodriguez activated another communication channel. Grakthor's own soldiers began reporting in, but not with military precision. They were begging for orders, asking for help, describing attacks that made no tactical sense. "This is impossible," Grakthor said, his voice losing its authority. "You are primitives. New to space, weak." Keltar stepped forward, his weapons trained on the Krek's commander. "We were weak," he said, his translated voice carrying pure hatred. "You taught us to be strong." The final phase of the assault was almost gentle by comparison. Grakthor and his remaining soldiers were captured, processed, and prepared for transport. But Rodriguez made sure they saw everything: the efficiency of the operation, the advanced technology the humans had provided, and most importantly, the transformation of the Zilani from victims into predators. As dawn broke over the ruined colony, Rodriguez stood in what had once been a Zilani school. The walls still had children's artwork on them, but now they were decorated with human military equipment and Krek's prisoners. Captain Neil Brooks, monitoring communications from orbit, contacted the landing team with news that would change everything. "Major, you need to hear this," Brooks said. "We're intercepting Krek's military communications across 3 sectors. Word of what happened here is spreading faster than we expected." "What kind of word?" Rodriguez asked. 3 Krek's battle fleets have requested new orders rather than engage Zilani forces. 2 commanders have been removed from duty for refusing to attack what they call the human-trained killers. And get this, there are reports of Krek soldiers deserting rather than face deployment to Zilani space. Rodriguez felt a mixture of pride and unease. The plan had worked better than they had hoped. maybe too much better. There's more, Brooks continued. The Galactic Assembly is calling an emergency session. Apparently, some of the other species are concerned about what they're calling human corruption of civilized warfare. Rodriguez looked around at the captured base, at the Zilani commandos who now moved like human special forces, at the Krex prisoners who flinched whenever they saw a Zilani face. Major, Keltar said, approaching with a report, the prisoners are ready for transport. What should we do with Commander Grakthor? Rodriguez studied the Krex commander, who sat in restraints with the look of someone whose entire worldview had collapsed. Let him go, Rodriguez said finally. Sir? Keltar looked confused. Let him go back to his people, Rodriguez repeated. Let him tell them what he saw here. Let him describe what happens when humans teach someone else how to fight. As the transport ships prepared to leave the dead world, Rodriguez wondered if they had won a battle or started something that would consume the galaxy. The Zilani were no longer victims, but what had they become? Looking at Keltar's face, at the cold satisfaction in those crystal features, Rodriguez began to suspect they were about to find out. The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly had never seen anything like this. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in the human delegation section, watching as species that had ignored genocide for months suddenly found their voices when the victims started winning. The Great Hall buzzed with angry voices, fearful whispers, and urgent debates. On the central screens, footage from the Kethmore operation played on repeat. Krex soldiers running in terror, Zilani commandos moving with deadly precision, weapons that shouldn't exist, tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Delegate Morthak of the Altanian Republic stood at the central podium, his color-changing skin cycling through shades of red and purple that Sullivan recognized as extreme agitation. What we have witnessed, Morthak declared, his voice shaking, is not warfare. It is the corruption of a peaceful species into something monstrous. The humans have taken the Zilani and turned them into killers. Around the hall, representatives nodded in agreement. The same species that had refused to help the Zilani 6 months ago were now horrified by what the Zilani had become. Ambassador Kethvar sat with the human delegation, no longer the desperate, broken figure who had first pleaded for help. His crystal skin still sparkled, but now there was something harder in his appearance, something that reminded Sullivan of veteran soldiers she had known. The evidence speaks for itself, continued the Vorthon delegate, her wings flickering with nervous energy. Psychological warfare, stealth attacks, torture of prisoners. These are not the actions of a civilized species. What torture? Admiral Sullivan asked, standing up. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded warships in real battles. Please specify what torture took place. The Vorthon delegate activated a holographic display showing footage from Krex military communications. Listen to these reports. Krex soldiers describing voices in the dark, friends disappearing, weapons that cause paralysis rather than clean death. That's called fear, Sullivan replied calmly. It's what happens when an aggressor species realizes their victims can fight back. This is exactly the problem, Morthak interjected. The humans have taught the Zilani to think like predators instead of prey. They have corrupted their natural peaceful nature. General Tony Garcia, recently arrived from Earth with additional military advisors, leaned forward in his seat. Delegate Morthak, with respect, what exactly did you expect? You wanted the Zilani to die quietly? We expected them to fight with honor, came the reply. Honor doesn't stop extinction, Garcia said simply. The session was interrupted by urgent communications from the Krex border regions. A technician activated the main display to show real-time intelligence feeds. Captain Dan Murphy, monitoring the communication systems, stood to address the assembly. Ladies, gentlemen, and other entities, I'm receiving reports from across Krex space. In the past 48 hours, 3 battle fleets have surrendered rather than engage Zilani forces. The Krex High Command is reporting widespread panic among their military units. The hall erupted in shocked voices. The Krex Empire, which had been unstoppable for 3 centuries, was collapsing from within. This is what we feared, the Meridian Union representative said, its energy form flickering rapidly. The humans haven't just saved the Zilani, they've created a weapon that could destroy galactic stability. Galactic stability? Ambassador Kethvar spoke for the first time during the session, his voice cutting through the noise. You speak of stability while my people were being exterminated. Where was your concern for stability when Krex fleets burned our worlds? That was different, Morthak replied weakly. Yes, Kethvar said, standing slowly. It was, then we were dying. Now they are. The cold satisfaction in the Zilani ambassador's voice sent a chill through the assembly. This was not the same species that had begged for help months earlier. Dr. Michelle Lee, the newly arrived chief xenopsychologist for the human delegation, activated her own display. If I may address the assembly, she said, I think there are some misconceptions here about what has actually occurred. Her display showed psychological profiles and behavioral analysis. The Zilani haven't been corrupted or changed into something alien. They've been taught to survive. Every tactic they've used, every strategy they've employed, comes from human military doctrine developed over thousands of years of warfare. Exactly our point, the Vorthon delegate said. Human military doctrine is barbaric and effective, Dr. Lee replied, which is why humanity is still alive after competing with ourselves for millennia. The debate was interrupted by new intelligence reports. Murphy stood again, his face grave. Additional updates from Krex space. The Empire is requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations. They want to discuss terms. The hall fell silent. The Krex Empire, which had never requested anything from anyone, was asking for peace talks. After 300 years of expansion, Murphy continued, the Krex are willing to negotiate. The question is, what are the terms? Admiral Sullivan stood and walked to the central podium. The terms are simple, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. The Krex Empire withdraws from all Zilani territory, pays reparations for damages, and accepts monitoring of their military activities. Those are surrender terms, Morthak protested. Yes, Sullivan agreed. They are. And if they refuse? Sullivan looked around the hall, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. Then the Zilani continue their advance into Krex space and we continue providing military support. The threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Every species in the hall understood what Sullivan was really saying. The human-trained Zilani could do to the Krex what the Krex had been doing to others for centuries. This is madness, the Altanian delegate said. You're talking about the complete destruction of a galactic power. We're talking about justice, Ambassador Kethvar replied. The Krex chose to make this war about extermination. Now they get to live with that choice. General Garcia activated another display showing strategic projections. The mathematics are simple, he said, unconsciously echoing the Vorthon delegate's earlier words. The Zilani now have human tactical doctrine, human weapons technology, and most importantly, human willingness to do whatever it takes to win. The Krex military structure can't adapt fast enough to counter that combination. So what happens now? Asked the Meridian Union representative. Captain Neil Brooks, who had been quietly monitoring communications throughout the session, stood with new information. I'm receiving reports from across this sector of space. 17 species have submitted formal requests for human military advisors. Everyone wants what the Zilani got. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. If humanity began training other species in their military methods, the entire galactic balance of power would shift. You see what you've done? Morthak accused, pointing at the human delegation. You've destabilized everything. Every species will want to become like the Zilani. The galaxy will be full of killers. Admiral Sullivan nodded slowly. Yes, it will. The question is, do you want them to be our killers or someone else's? Dr. Lee stepped forward with her final analysis. The reality is simple. The galaxy now knows that human military doctrine can turn any species into an effective fighting force. That knowledge can't be undone. The only question is how we manage it. As if on cue, communication alerts began sounding throughout the hall. Species representatives received urgent messages from their home governments, all asking the same question. How do we get human military advisors? Admiral Sullivan looked around the hall at the faces of species that had dismissed humanity as too young and inexperienced just months earlier. Now they were afraid of what humanity could teach their enemies. The Terran Federation, she announced formally, is prepared to discuss military advisory agreements with any species that meets our requirements. What requirements? Multiple voices asked simultaneously. Sullivan's smile was cold and professional. Strict rules of engagement, civilian protection protocols, and most importantly, human oversight of all military operations. You want to learn how to fight like humans? Then you accept human authority over how that knowledge is used. As the session dissolved into urgent private discussions between delegations, Ambassador Kethavar approached Admiral Sullivan. "Admiral," he said quietly, "my people are grateful for what humanity has taught us. But I must ask, what have we become?" Sullivan looked at the Zilani ambassador, seeing the transformation that had taken place over the past months. "You've become survivors," she said. "The question is whether the galaxy can survive what it takes to survive." Outside the Great Hall, communication networks buzzed with urgent messages as species across the galaxy tried to understand what the human-Zilani partnership meant for their own futures. The age of honorable defeat was over. The age of human-taught warfare had begun. 1 year had passed since Ambassador Kethavar first stood before the Galactic Assembly begging for help. Now he stood in the same hall, but everything else had changed. The desperate refugee had become the representative of a regional power. The victims had become the victors. Commander Rick Thompson, now serving as military attaché to the expanded Human Advisory Mission, watched from the human delegation area as species after species requested meetings with Kethavar. The same beings who had ignored Zilani pleas for help now competed for Zilani attention. "Ironic, isn't it?" Captain Jake Morrison said, joining Thompson at the observation window. The older man looked tired. A year of turning peaceful species into effective warriors had taken its toll. "Sir?" Thompson asked. "A year ago, nobody would talk to them. Now everybody wants to be their friend." Morrison gestured toward the crowded diplomatic area, where Kethavar was surrounded by representatives from dozens of worlds. Fear is a powerful motivator. On the main floor, Admiral Kate Sullivan was addressing the full assembly. Her promotion to head of Terran Federation Galactic Military Command had been inevitable once the scope of human military influence became clear. "The Terran Accords," Admiral Sullivan announced, "represent a new framework for galactic security. Any species seeking human military assistance will agree to strict protocols governing the use of that assistance." She activated a holographic display showing the treaty terms. The rules were comprehensive and non-negotiable. Human oversight of all military operations, protection of civilian populations, and most importantly, human authority to withdraw support from any species that violated the accords. In the audience, former enemies sat side by side with former allies, all equally interested in what humanity was offering. The Krex Empire, what remained of it after their defeat, had already signed the accords. Their representative, a broken warrior named Vaktar who had replaced the disgraced former leadership, looked like he was still in shock from his species' fall from power. Dr. Michelle Lee stood to present her analysis of the past year's developments. "The psychological impact of human military doctrine extends far beyond the battlefield," she explained to the assembled delegates. "When a species learns that victory is possible, their entire worldview changes." Her display showed data from across the galaxy. Crime rates had dropped on worlds with human-trained security forces. Territorial disputes that had lasted centuries were being resolved through the threat of human-style warfare. Pirates and raiders were avoiding entire sectors of space. "The effect is simple," Dr. Lee continued. "When everyone knows that certain species can fight like humans, everyone behaves more carefully." General Patricia Allen, the architect of the new galactic security system, took the podium next. She was a stern woman with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had commanded respect on a dozen battlefields. "The old system failed," she said bluntly. "For centuries, this galaxy operated on the principle that might makes right. The strong preyed on the weak and the weak died quietly. That system produced the Krex Empire and dozens of other aggressive powers." She paused, looking around the hall. "The new system operates on a different principle. Anyone can become strong enough to survive, but only if they follow the rules." As if to emphasize her point, new intelligence reports began flowing in from across the galaxy. Captain Dan Murphy, now coordinator of Galactic Intelligence Operations, shared the latest updates. 3 former Krex client states have requested human advisors, Murphy reported. The Altanian Republic is asking for assistance with their border security. Even the Meridian Union wants to discuss what they call defensive preparedness. Thompson watched the faces of the various delegates as these reports came in. Fear, hope, ambition, and calculation. All the emotions that drove galactic politics were on display. But what struck him most was the change in the humans. Admiral Sullivan, General Allen, Dr. Lee, they all carried themselves differently now. They were no longer the junior members of galactic society. They were the power brokers, the kingmakers, the species that everyone else needed to impress. "Commander Thompson," a voice said behind him. He turned to see Ambassador Kethvar approaching, flanked by two Zalani officers who moved with the fluid precision of human-trained soldiers. "Ambassador," Thompson replied, "how can I help you?" "I wanted to express my people's gratitude," Kethvar said, "and to ask a question that has been troubling me." "What question?" Kethvar looked out at the assembly hall, where species that had once dismissed him were now competing for his attention. "A year ago we were dying. You saved us. But what did we become in the process?" It was a question that had been keeping Thompson awake at night. The Zalani were no longer the gentle, artistic species they had been before the war. They were efficient, ruthless, and absolutely committed to ensuring that nothing like the Krex genocide could ever happen again. "You became survivors," Thompson said, using Admiral Sullivan's words from months earlier. "But at what cost?" Kethvar pressed. "My daughter commands soldiers who think like human special forces. My generals plan campaigns that would have horrified our ancestors. We have saved our species, but have we lost our souls?" Before Thompson could answer, an urgent communication alert sounded throughout the hall. Captain Murphy activated the main display to show incoming intelligence reports. "Major development," Murphy announced. "The hegemony of Srak has just declared war on 3 neighboring systems. They're demanding immediate human military assistance." The hegemony was a minor power that had signed the Terran Accords only 2 weeks earlier. Now they were trying to use human-trained forces for territorial expansion. General Allen's response was swift and decisive. "Military Advisory Group Srak is hereby recalled. Effective immediately. All human personnel are to withdraw within 48 hours. "But General," the Srak representative protested, "we have a signed agreement." "You had a signed agreement," Allen corrected, "which you just violated by initiating aggressive warfare without human approval. Your military advisory privileges are revoked." The message was clear to every species in the hall. Human military support came with strings attached. Very strong strings. As the session continued, Thompson found himself thinking about the galaxy they were creating. It was more peaceful than before, but that peace was built on the threat of human-style warfare. Every species knew that their neighbors might be learning human tactics, so everyone was more careful about starting conflicts. Lieutenant Susan Price, Thompson's aide, approached with new data from the monitoring stations. "Commander," she said quietly, "we're tracking significant changes in military spending across 17 star systems. Everyone's trying to upgrade their defenses." "Arms race?" Thompson asked. "More like an insurance policy," Price replied. "Nobody wants to be the species that gets caught unprepared when their neighbors have human advisors." As the day's session wound down, Thompson stood on the observation deck of the human diplomatic vessel, looking out at the stars. Below him, the newly constructed Terran Military Academy orbited Earth, its lights visible even from this distance. Captain Morrison joined him, as Thompson had known he would. The older officer had made this observation deck his unofficial office during diplomatic sessions. "Penny for your thoughts," Morrison said. "I was thinking about what Ambassador Kethvar said," Thompson replied. "About what his people became." Morrison nodded slowly. "It's the question, isn't it? We saved them, but we also changed them, made them more like us. Is that good or bad?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, watching ships from dozens of species dock at the human facility. Former enemies and former allies, all seeking the same thing: the ability to survive in a galaxy that was becoming more dangerous and more safe at the same time. "I don't know," Morrison admitted finally, "but I know this. A year ago, the Zalani were about to go extinct. Today, they're one of the most powerful species in this sector. Whatever we turn them into, it's better than dead." On the academy below, the inscription was clearly visible now. "In memory of those who learned too late that survival requires more than honor, it requires victory." As Thompson watched, a new group of cadets from a species he didn't recognize began their first day of training. They would learn human tactics, human strategies, and human ways of thinking about warfare. In 6 months, they would return to their worlds as something different than what they had been. "Captain," Thompson said, "what kind of galaxy are we building?" Morrison smiled, but it was a tired smile. "A galaxy where the good guys win," he said. "Even if winning changes what it means to be good." In the distance, communication arrays buzzed with messages from across known space. More requests for human advisors. More species wanting to learn the lessons that had turned the Zilani from victims into victors. The age of human influence had begun, built on the simple principle that anyone willing to fight like a human could survive like one. Whether the galaxy would survive that lesson remained to be seen.